It is crazy how different cases look today than they did even just 10 years ago, and I've got a bit of a throwback for you in this one. You'll either love it or hate it. Are you ready? Stay with me.
WireView is an innovative new product from Thermal Grizzly designed with the goal of measuring and logging GPU power consumption. It connects simply into your PCIe power arrangement of choice and is capable of displaying values such as current and peak power consumption, voltage, amperage, and even average power draws over 60 seconds. You can even buy them in multiple orientations to fit cards with either standard or flip supplemental power connectors. But WireView isn't just for data junkies like us. Its sleek design can even help clean up the look of a build and disarray, allowing you to run your cables across the top of your graphics card's backplate for a stealthy cable vibe. So be sure to check it out along with other Thermal Grizzly products via the link below.
Yeah, just need a few more seconds to clean this one up. You know, she's quite old, and that usually means she's quite dirty. This is the Cooler Master HAF 932 Advanced, and I can barely fit it in frame. It's quite a large case, but it surprisingly only has 7 PCIe slots at the rear. HAF, by the way, is an acronym, HAF, which stands for high airflow. That's right, Cooler Master was doing high airflow cases long before people actually started caring en masse about high airflow cases. That's not entirely true, but you know what I mean. But anyway, I wanted to make a short retrospective on this one because I think there are some features here that you'll really like if you're not super familiar with some of these older case designs, things like acrylic that you just don't see much anymore, especially in higher end premium chassis, and extremely large fans like this one here. I'm also going to build in it because I'm curious what higher end modern components look like in an old case like this. One thing that certainly reveals the 932's age is its front panel selection. You can see we've got 4 USB 2.0 ports. I'm not going to lie, I actually had to look up what this one was. It's an IEEE port. We have an eSATA port. We have non-unified microphone and headphone jacks, and then some power and hard drive LED indicators. But Cooler Master made up for it at the time by adding 2 USB 3.0 ports below. As you probably suspected, airflow is definitely a priority here, and that is made no more apparent than by the inclusion of these very large fans beneath these perforated grills. You can see this one here is definitely larger than your standard 120 or 140. I think it's either a 180 or 200. I'd have to go and look it up, but very beefy. You can see very large holes to get that air flowing inward, and of course it is not being obstructed by this removable front panel, which is also perforated. A large portion of this left side panel is also very clearly perforated with that beefy fan underneath. They're only 3-pin fans, but this was a bit less of an issue back then. It's the thought that counts. We've also got a 140mm at the rear, still 3-pin in case you're wondering, and you can see all this extra space above the motherboard area where you could fit a very thick radiator, you could fit tons of fans, push-pull config, and even get little cutouts here for external water cooling, which was more of a thing back then. You can fit a standard power supply down here, but interestingly enough, you can actually remove this water cooling plate and fit a second power supply above the motherboard. It may not be the most practical thing for an average builder, but it is a cool inclusion, and actually something that some modern cases still have today. Of course, the 932 supports your standard motherboard form factors, ITX, MATX, and ATX, but even eATX in this case, though you have to mind these cable cutouts, you might cover those with larger motherboards. There are 5 native hard drive bays included, 3.5-inch of course, but there is a 2.5-inch adapter in this top one if you have 2.5-inch SSDs. I might be wrong about this one, but if I recall the age of this case, at this time M.2 was kind of a new thing in consumer grade stuff, so it was 2.5-inch and 3.5-inch for most storage solutions. I am certain my age is showing because around the time this case launched, I was just getting into custom PC building. Must have been 10 or so years ago. And while I make no secret about my preference for more compact mid-towers when it comes to modern PC cases, there's something about this design that I am just absolutely in love with. It's practical, it's spacious, there's so much airflow baked into it. You can tell that Cooler Master really took their time with this design. I do think it's a bit weird to have such a large footprint and yet only 7 PCIe slots. Maybe the one thing I would have changed at the time, and you probably could have made the argument to reduce the number of 5.25-inch bays up top, although your hardcore 5.25-inch enthusiast would definitely say otherwise. Speaking of, we're gonna take care of these 2 gaps right now, starting first with a Blu-ray optical drive. Just, you know, for the lulz. Second is this old school hub, which has support for various fan RPMs. You can change those here. You can adapt additional USB devices here to the left. You even get SD card readers in this thing. And we can just pop this top cover right back in place. That looks so much better now. These one-tap locking mechanisms are also pretty cool. One thing I just noticed is that we're gonna have to be very careful about cable management because, well, space behind the motherboard tray is not great. So for instances where we have, well, you know, power supplies with lots of cables attached, I imagine the bulk of them is gonna sit somewhere around here. Not the end of the world, since most of that's gonna be covered by a grill and fan anyway. Let's get a platform in here then, shall we? I think I'm gonna go with an AIO. I'm gonna do a push-pull config in the top of this case. Reaching awkwardly to get this situated. So that right there, there's no standoff in the middle to keep this board in place, so I've got to hold it while I screw things down. It's been a long time since I've set up a push-pull config for an AIO, but we have the space, so why not? I've also forgotten how difficult this is to do. I think that there will do it. It's pretty chunky. I'm gonna try to clean up this just absolute disaster back here. Not making any promises though. Well, yeah, it's okay. It's pretty awful. I was trying to install a few hard disk drives, but these little cages, this stuff just like falls apart. These little cages are made of plastic and they're starting to break, and then also the pieces that hold these mounts in place are also just disintegrating. It's so old. So I'm not sure if we're gonna be able to pull this off. They're also not going in all the way for some reason, so I can't actually push the drive all the way in because these are getting caught, and that's really frustrating. Not something you would have likely run into in a new version of this case, just something I wanted to point out here. Somehow managed to wiggle 2 of these in, and we're just gonna leave it at that. I had an idea to put 4 in here for like a NAS, but yeah, 2 is it. Finally then, our big boy. This is an Asus TUF RTX 4070 Ti Super. It's gotta have a big name to be legit, right? So we're gonna slot this all the way in, or well, as much in as I can get it. And we have these like built-in retention clips, which I'm not feeling super enthusiastic about. Yeah, these like aren't gonna hold the card up at all. A bit silly for these larger graphics cards nowadays. This part's also gonna be a bit finicky. Not even sure I'm gonna be able to get this on.
A few moments later.
Okay, it's bulging a bit in the middle here, but this is about as good as it's gonna get. I'm gonna be brutally honest, I'm not super happy with the way this looks. I definitely could spend a bit more time on this, but at what cost? Because ultimately we're not gonna be able to see much inside of here anyway. I'm more concerned about airflow, making sure that none of our primary components are obstructed by cables, etc. And I think we've done a good enough job with that. You really start to notice the age of the case in these front IO wires, just a rainbow puke, ketchup and mustard mismatched, like it just, I don't really like the way this looks at all. We have several USB 2 cables because again, that's what this case primarily supports, and then some weird spaghetti string thing for HD audio. Up top here, it looks a bit better. Again, you just have colored wires instead of just flat black ones like you see nowadays. This is my fault here, going with a white cable extension. Actually, this is a splitter to support 3 fans in one because there are so many fans in this case. It's better, but still not ideal in my opinion. And then also in my opinion, I just don't like the way that these optical drives look in standard like mid towers and full towers. You have to run these SATA data cables really awkwardly around some cutout behind the motherboard tray. Same goes for SATA power. But I'd be willing to bet there are some out there who would happily pay these prices for the sake of getting their hands on something this old school. They just don't make them like they used to, and for better or for worse, I think it's a bit of a mixed bag here. There is a lot of room to build inside the case, but then it also feels oddly restricted when it comes to cable management. That's where things really started falling apart, at least for me personally. Going with a modular power supply cleaned things up just a tad, but we still have a lot of places that we just had to shove cables, namely behind these hard drive cages. Not ideal. There was plenty of room for a push-pull radiator fan assembly up top, which is nice. Again, we have these very large included case fans in the HAF 932 Advanced, so I can't dock it for points there. But at the end of the day, this is one of those cases that you're just either going to love or hate. Reason being, and this is just me purely speculating here, I think folks prioritize aesthetics a bit more than they used to. Cooler Master, for example, chose to omit a full acrylic side panel here, or well, it would have been acrylic at the time more than likely, but in today's age, it would have been a tempered glass panel, right? Solid panel, air ain't getting through that. Instead, the 932 includes the larger mesh array with a sliver of an acrylic panel up top that you honestly can't even see well into. Whatever the case may be, pun intended, I think it's safe to say that there's a pretty good reason why cases like this just don't exist much anymore. You don't have really a need for tons of 5 1/4 inch bays. Heck, you don't even really have much of a need in most use cases to have 5 or more hard disk drive trays. I mean, we've moved largely away from spinning disks. Now, there are folks who will stand by spinning disks, and I totally get that, maybe from a data recovery standpoint or something along those lines, but the trends are moving away from that, and well, we just don't have a need for all this extra space nowadays. So we could really shrink this case quite a bit and even shrink it top to bottom, and then you'd have a modern form factor, right? And Cooler Master makes cases like that. Today, you can find them from Corsair, NZXT, Cooler Master, Lee & Lee, et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, this is me preaching to the choir. I know most of you know this by now, but it's just an interesting trend to note, you know, like the reason why a lot of cases are shrinking and why they're prioritizing aesthetics is because a lot of the things that don't necessarily look all that appealing, at least internally, like 5 1/4 inch drive bays and a plethora of hard disk drives, aren't really used all that often by PC gaming enthusiasts. I'm just calling it like I see it, okay? I know there's gonna be people screaming in the comments, well, Greg, actually, I still use my 5 1/4 inch bays. It's okay. I know there are still some of you out there. I'm not trying to shame you. I'm just trying to explain why case trends have changed over the years. It's booted up. Looks really good. Now it's just kind of rainbow RGB right now. The LEDs in the front fan are pretty weak. I can barely see them lit as is, but I think we did okay with this one. Again, I'm not totally sold on the looks, but this is what a modern build looks like in an older case. Not necessarily a sleeper, just, you know, old school. There's only one thing left to do then. We've connected the left side fan, and yeah, it's not totally fit the way it should be. Yeah, I mean, it's not bad. My Ultra MD3 here appears to be bugged out just a little. We do, oh yes, have a working optical drive. And well, yeah, like I said, you can sort of kind of see inside up top there, but we're not really revealing much. And to some, I'm sure, this is just the way you like it. It's not my cup of tea, but it is cool. I want to take this back off, but I'm afraid I'm going to rip the fan from the motherboard. This wasn't the most practical design from a, you know, like usability standpoint, but once it's set up and ready to go, it's actually quite convenient to have a large fan just pulling air in directly to your graphics card and your CPU. So active VRM MOSFET cooling, active graphics card cooling, supplementing the fans that are already in the shroud. This works. It's kind of a shame that it's not used as much today. Maybe you could find a way to like integrate a fan into the left panel and just have it use like little contact pins so that it's wireless and easier to manage. But actually, that would be a pretty cool. Someone's had to have done that already. There's no way that that's like a new thing. Like build a fan into a left side panel and then have it just have little, you know, little golden fingers that'll attach to the case that'll be powered by the motherboard. You just run a wire from there to the board. That would actually be pretty sweet. A nice solution for dealing with the awkward, you know, wires stemming from a left side fan. Let's see if I can safely, yeah. So then you've got to deal with the snag here. Hope that you don't, you know, rip things out incorrectly. There we go. And then we can take this bad boy back off. So that's about it for the Cooler Master HAF 932 Advanced. Thank you all so much for watching. I do hope you enjoyed this retrospective. If you'd like to see more videos like this, maybe see different things discussed in these kinds of videos, let me know for future reference in the comment section. That would be greatly appreciated. If you have a case in mind you'd like us to look at, those suggestions would be appreciated as well. Or if it's like other old hardware, it could be like old CPU coolers or things like that. I think this would make for a pretty cool little mini series, and I would learn quite a bit as well personally, just, you know, running through some older hardware, looking at how things used to be done and why they're different today. Consider subscribing if you haven't already. Give this video a thumbs up if you thought it was cool, and stay tuned for the next one. My name is Greg. Thanks for learning with me.